Hey guys, James here again with another game review, and today I want to talk about V Rising, a new vampire-based survival crafting RPG by Stunlock Studios. V Rising just entered early access not too long ago, and I just gotta say, it is just so well done and has been on my mind so much that I feel like I have to talk about it. If I had to describe V Rising using other games, I'd say it's like if you took the survival and base building aspects of Rust, combined them with the MOBA style gameplay of Battlerite or Smite, and then added in vampires. V Rising does an incredible job of blending the genres while also introducing their own unique flavor to create a game that feels really unlike any other game that I've played before. I have been loving V Rising, and honestly, I think me and my friends might be hopelessly addicted to it. So, without further ado, let's dive into this. So in V Rising, you play as a vampire who awakens from a deep slumber and returns to the world in order to hunt for blood and build your very own Gothic castle.
The Gothic Castle.
Gothic Castle.
That's what I said.
Surviving as a vampire isn't easy, and one of the things I found really interesting about the game was how they made it so vampires actually feel quite vulnerable. This is mainly because of two particular mechanics. The first is the blood mechanic. As a vampire, you need to periodically feed on the blood of a living being in order to keep your blood pool filled. Think of your blood pool as a combination of your health, mana, and hunger or thirst. Whenever you fight an enemy, after reducing their HP below 25%, you have the option to feed on them. Doing so triggers a channel spell which will fill your blood pool up. Having blood is important because it allows you to cast your abilities and also can be used to heal yourself. If you run out of blood, you'll begin to lose health until you eventually die. Every NPC in the world has a blood type and a randomly generated blood quality percentage. If you manage to find and feed on higher blood quality NPCs, they'll grant you stronger bonuses based on the type of NPC that they are. So, for example, if you feed on a rogue, they provide you with critical strike chance, as well as increased movement speed. Blood as a mechanic is really awesome as it keeps you constantly moving and hunting, and you'll need to make tough decisions such as whether or not you can fight someone based on how much blood you might have at a particular time. I also just like how streamlined it is to have one key resource that you have to manage all the time. The second mechanic is the day and night cycle in the game. V Rising sports a very well done day and night cycle mechanic which is crucial to your vampire life. During the day, you can stand to be exposed to the sun for a couple of seconds, but you're going to want to hop from shaded area to shaded area in order to keep yourself from combusting. Admittedly, avoiding the sun can be a bit annoying, but the day and night cycle is just super well done, as shadows will realistically shift based on the time of the day, combined with some really nice lighting effects, and I just gotta say, I'm really impressed with the implementation of the mechanic. My main thoughts here are that maybe it'd be cool to add a weather and seasonal cycle as well in order to give a little more variation to the world as time passes. They actually already have a blood moon mechanic which occurs once in a while which gives boosts to powers of all vampires, and that's definitely a nice change of pace. Don't worry though, with a little bit of time put in, you'll begin to build yourself a base that can keep you safe from enemies and the elements. Do you wanna build a castle? So like I mentioned, one of the big things you're going to be doing in V Rising is building your own Gothic castle.
Gothic Castle.
As you progress through the game, you'll eventually be able to create a castle heart. This acts as the core of your castle, and if enemies reach the heart, they can potentially destroy or take over your castle. However, you can feed the heart blood essence, which is used to keep your base safe. As long as you keep your doors closed and your heart fed, then other vampires will only be able to raid you during designated castle PvP hours. Like in Rust and other survival crafting games, you'll need to go around the map in order to gather different resources, like ore, cotton, lumber, you name it. Then you can lay down borders around your castle heart, build up your base, and then fill it up with different crafting stations in order to create and unlock more and more. For the most part, the act of building is fairly simple, although it can be a bit annoying how you need to completely clear areas in order to place things down. The castles themselves look great though, and there are a ton of cosmetic features you can use to decorate your castle. Properly organizing your castle is rewarded too, as setting up particular rooms for particular functions, such as creating a workshop room for woodworking, will make it so that crafting stations operate quicker than normal. I do feel though, and this might just be a general issue of all survival crafting games, I feel like moving and reorganizing your base can be quite a chore, and I would have liked it to be easier to move and remove different features. Similarly, resource management can be a bit of a chore, but there are some pretty good quality of life features in place to help with this, although the big thing that's missing is selecting custom amounts of a resource. I think these are going to be issues in any game like this, but thankfully it didn't feel particularly egregious here. There's also a really cool vampire servant system which allows you to mind control and take familiars who can help you with different tasks. You can set up servant coffins in your crypt, then, using your vampire mind control powers, you can attract NPCs to your base to either serve as your slaves or to become blood bags. The servants can then patrol your castle to defend against any enemies, and can also be sent on quests to gather resources for you. The really cool thing about the castles is that they help to contribute to the sense of development in the world. Not only will your castle get larger and progress, but you'll also run into the castles of other vampires or clans as you explore the world. If someone ever abandons a server in their castle and doesn't feed it enough blood essence, That castle will then begin to decay, which then allows people to destroy it. Then you're left with the ruins of a bygone time, and I don't know, I just really like how this creates an interesting and organic dynamic where the world is constantly changing. The only other thing I'll say here is that the ramp up can be a bit slow, and I can see this being a bit difficult for solo players or players without as much time to constantly be jumping into the game. Part of this could also be because the progression in this game works a little bit differently than your classic RPG experience. So progression and the quest system in V-Rising was definitely a bit different from what I was expecting going into the game. After first spawning in, you get a series of quests that help you build basic gear, and then eventually get the resources needed to start building your castle. Then, one of the early buildings you get in the game is the Blood Altar. The Blood Altar allows you to track the blood of a number of strong NPC bosses. Hunting and then defeating these bosses is core to your progression in the game because each boss will unlock different spells, abilities, and even different crafting recipes and stations for you to use. Because of this, progression in V-Rising is much more objective based rather than focused on leveling a character up. In fact, you actually don't even have a character level in the game or any sort of experience system. Rather, the level of your character is determined by the gear you have equipped. And I actually think this is a really important distinction to call out for people interested in the game. Again, V-Rising as a game is a lot closer to Rust, where your power is determined by your gear and technical ability, rather than your classic RPG experience where you level up a character with XP from mobs and quests. Even so, there still is quite a grind when it comes to farming resources, but hopefully with other clanmates this can be made a little easier. For me personally, I actually really like this as a progression system as I really enjoy working towards the different goals and bosses as they help make each milestone feel much more important. The only issue with the progression is that once you start getting into the later game, you can sort of get bottlenecked based on the recipes you're able to discover and the ever-increasing resource requirements. Regarding the bosses themselves though, I actually really love the bosses. These engagements usually have you going through some point of interest, fighting through a group of mobs, and then reaching the final boss. I was really impressed with the boss fights because they were way more complicated than I had initially expected. The boss fights here are reminiscent of Diablo games, I guess, and each boss is pretty unique with different movesets and abilities. I'd actually say that the boss fights and the mobs in general are actually pretty tough. My friends and I had to constantly take turns retreating and healing up in order to defeat a number of bosses, and this challenge was definitely very enjoyable for me. The only issue though is the fact that bosses tend to stay in a designated area, so if other players on the server are trying to fight the same boss, you might be forced to either work together, fight the other players, or wait for the boss to respawn. This brings me to the PvP aspects of the game. So in my opinion, your PvP experience with the game can vary quite a bit depending on your server. Your mileage may really vary depending on who you meet and whether you have people to play with, so everything I talk about here might be a different experience for you. There are PvE servers available though if you're a lover and not a fighter, and PvE servers tend to be far more wholesome as everyone works together to build each other up and beat the game. Before we talk about all of that though, let's quickly talk about the combat. I personally have really enjoyed the combat in V-Rising, but I can see that it's not necessarily everyone's cup of tea. You move around using WASD, and something to note is that the movement does feel a bit slow-paced by nature, and as a result, dodging can be a bit difficult. Then, you have a basic attack, and for each weapon type there are some additional attacks, such as a sword spin attack, or a projectile you can throw out with your Reaper. Then you can equip two basic spells, an ultimate spell, as well as a movement-based spell that helps you with dodging and avoiding things. For a number of these spells though, keep in mind that there is a little bit of a cast time, so things can definitely feel a bit more slow-paced, and you'll need to properly aim and time skill shots if you want to maximize DPS. This is especially true in PvP, as the time to kill in the game is actually pretty long. Since weapons and spells are hidden behind different bosses and progression, this can definitely make PvP a bit tough, especially if you just run into people with better gear. Even so, while you might be at a disadvantage, I do think the MOBA style of combat leaves a good amount up to your skill, and you can make use of your movement abilities or change into different animals in order to run away, if you need. For PvP servers, players can freely attack each other if you happen to meet in the open world. This can make traveling very perilous, especially if you're coming off a boss fight or a harvesting run. Personally, my first instinct in PvP isn't usually to just start blasting, and in general, the people I've met on my server have been really great, and usually don't attack when unprovoked. Despite this, I have had my share of situations where someone jumps me and kills me, causing me to lose everything that I looted. And let's be real, dying in PvP sucks and made me want to stop playing the game, but at the same time, I also know what I signed up for. Just something to note, when you die, you still keep your weapons and armor, but it really makes me sad that you lose all of the loot that you had found. I think this can make the game a bit difficult for solo players, as it can be pretty easy to get caught out if you're not careful. I would definitely suggest you pay attention to your server settings, and maybe look for servers where clan sizes are 2. They should definitely make solo servers though, and I'm kind of surprised they don't already have them. Depending on the server, there are usually designated times for when players can assault each other's bases, and I think this was done in order to help make it so that people could actually defend assaults. Even so, since there's no guarantee you'll be on during an assault, or your enemies will be on during an assault, I can see them being pretty anticlimactic, as you might not necessarily get the player versus player interaction you might want. The PvP windows can actually be pretty long too, with mine being around 46 hours each day, so it can definitely be a bit unrealistic to expect people to be on that whole time. While I personally haven't performed a castle raid yet, I have heard and seen that the siege golems you use to initiate raids can feel pretty broken and can really level castles, especially if people aren't around to defend. I think getting your hard-earned castle destroyed like that just sounds really disheartening, and it really must suck, especially if you put in 30 to 40 plus hours into the game. Hopefully with some tweaks to the rating system, it'll help it feel better as a whole. It hasn't happened to me yet, knock on wood, but honestly, I have no idea how I'd react if I logged in one day to find that my entire castle had been destroyed and that I had to rebuild from the ground up. Would I just quit the game at that point? Maybe, I'm not sure to be honest. Regardless, what I do like about the PvP is how it affects the world. Similar to what I discussed earlier about the decaying and destroying of castles, the world in V Rising can feel very much alive. I really liked how I found myself developing allies and recognizing enemies who I want to kill on sight in the future, and I actually think the game might benefit a lot if they allowed us to declare formal allies and war on our enemies. Again though, your experience will vary depending on the server you find. I'm blessed to have a pretty chill server overall, and our admin even helped to set up an arena tournament for us to duke it out. After that experience though, I do have to say that they should definitely add some sort of indoor arena somewhere, or add some more mechanics to have player organized fights. Finally, I just wanted to mention some of my complaints or potential issues with the game so far that I didn't already mention before. I think the biggest one I'm finding to be a nuisance would have to be traversing around the map. The map in the game is absolutely massive, and that's awesome, but I do have to say that walking back and forth across the map can feel really tedious. Not only can the journey be long, but with the threat of strong mobs and other players, it can really get your anxiety going a bit. Going all the way back to your base sucks, and there are definitely limited quick travel options, as the game doesn't allow you to quick travel when you have loot in your inventory. I totally understand and agree with the design choice personally, but it does make the act of going back to your base really suck. As such, getting a good castle spot in the center of the map is super important, but you might only be able to do so much when there are others on the server already. Another thing that can be a bit sad is the fact that your characters are locked to servers. And you might be asking, what do I mean by that? Well, as I mentioned before, V Rising is much closer to Rust than it is to, say, World of Warcraft. You can't just take a character you have and play them on any server. Since you have your own particular castle in your own particular spot on that particular server, it makes it impossible for your character and castle to be carried across other servers, at least right now. While I totally understand why this is the case, and I personally don't have issues with it, I can also see how this can really suck, especially if your base gets destroyed. I also just wanted to call out this one really minor gripe. For some odd reason, whenever you add items to a chest and sort them, they organize them from the bottom right. I don't know whose idea this was, but I'm convinced that they must be some sort of psychopath. Overall though, I have been loving V Rising. I just think that it's so well done, especially for an early access game. There is an insane amount of content, and even after 40 plus hours poured in the first week, I don't think I'm anywhere close to the end game. I'm also assuming they're going to continue making updates throughout the early access period, and that makes me really excited to see what else they roll out. Beyond all of that though, I think the thing that I love about V Rising the most is how much it really makes you feel like a vampire. I love how I feel the need to feed, how I feel the fear of the sun, and silver, and garlic. I love turning into animals and running away from enemies. I love having my own castle and servants, and not being able to enter the castles of other people unless they let you in. I love how you can have clans which develop relationships with each other. The whole experience is just so immersive, and at one point, as me and my friends were terrorizing the people of a local town, I had to stop myself and ask,
are we the baddies?
Slowly, the lines between game and reality blur. What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. I am no longer James. Instead, rise, Becca the vampire. But yeah, I think V Rising is really great. Since it's an early access, I won't be giving it a score just yet, but at $20, I think the game is an absolute steal. Obviously, it still has some room to grow, but I do think that the game is probably one of the most impressive early access experience I've ever had, and one of my favorite games of the year so far. I would only say, just know what you're getting yourself into. The game is definitely better with others, and be aware that it's not your classic RPG experience. Even so, I think there is a lot to love with V Rising, and would definitely recommend giving it a try. But hey, that's just me. Let me know down below what you think. Have you tried V Rising, and what do you think of it? And of course, if you made it this far, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do consider hitting that like and subscribe button to help out the channel. And as usual, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Peace.